Nice to see everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight and practicing together. Welcome to all those who come here for the first time. Kind of reminds me when I first encountered Buddhism, started practicing. I was first year of college, 1978. Long time hence, and I hope tonight can be set you on the path as well of practicing and examining your life. Traditionally, I've presented a koan from the Zen tradition, my training experiences in Zen, and I picked a koan tonight that I thought would. I'm glad I actually wasn't aware that all of you visiting students would be here tonight, but I think it's a good koan for entry into practice and examination of our life. It's about fear, which, for anxiety in my profession, I'm a psychiatrist. Anxiety is, as Kierkegaard, the famous philosopher, said, it's the ailment of the age, anxiety, fear. So I hope to talk a little bit about fear, fearlessness, and the spiritual warrior, if you will. This is a koan from one of the 2 or 3 major koan collections in the Zen tradition, the Book of Equanimity. This is case number 75. The koan traditionally is broken down into a pointer, which kind of helps you kind of gear your mind towards what the koan is pointing to, and then the actual case itself, which is usually taken from an actual encounter between a Zen teacher and student, or 2 students, or 2 teachers, and then a verse afterwards, all of which is pointing in the same direction to something that can't be put into words, true, but hopefully will help clarify your mind. This is case number 75. It's entitled Ryuan's Fundamental Constant Principle. The pointer. Even as you call it thus, it is already changed. Where knowledge does not reach, avoid speaking of it. Here, is there any investigating or not? The main case. Priest Ryuan asked his teacher Yantao, what is the fundamental constant principle? Yantao said, moving. Ryuan said, when moving, what then? Yantao said, you don't see the fundamental constant principle. Ryuan stood there thinking. Yantao said, if you agree, you are not yet free of sense and matter. If you do not agree, you'll be forever sunk in birth and death. At these words, Ryuan attained great enlightenment. The capping verse. The round pearl has no hollows. The great raw gem isn't polished. What is esteemed by people of the way is having no edges. Removing the road of agreement, senses and matter are empty. The free body, resting on nothing, stands out unique and alive. So you might be wondering, what does a koan about moving, or in Buddhism we would commonly call impermanence, transiency, have to do with fear or fearlessness? Well, because it's the constantly shifting ground of impermanence, if you will, that's reminding us all the time that we arise from emptiness, we abide nowhere, and we return to emptiness again, moment to moment. Yet we go through great pains in our lives to abide, hold on, grasp, continue in some way. No wonder fear and anxiety is the ailment of the age. How can you hold on, abide, grasp in a world where all conditioned things are impermanent, transient? No wonder we're afraid, trying to hold on. I can't stress enough the importance of examining our relationship with impermanence, with change. The Buddha said, all things are established on a non-abiding basis. Nothing rests, nothing fixed. He also advised, activate the mind without dwelling on anything. In other words, awaken the mind without fixing it on something, without abiding on anything, because all things are transient. We know this from quantum theory. Particle physics now confirms what the Buddha said 2,500 years ago. Everything is in constant flux. James Plotinus said it, all is flux. Mostly empty space, too. I like the way Shunryo Suzuki put it, the author of the now famous Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. He said, the basic teaching of Buddhism is the teaching of transiency, or change. That everything changes is the basic truth for each existence. No one can deny this truth, and all the teaching of Buddhism is condensed within it. This is the teaching for all of us. Wherever we go, this teaching is true. It's our inability to accept this truth that is the cause for our suffering. All desire is the attempt to avoid this truth. Hold on, to want, to push away, to grasp. And the Buddha said, first noble truth, desire is the cause of suffering. So fearlessness is what's required of us if we're going to walk the path of the Buddha Dharma. If we're going to genuinely encounter our lives here, now, and this truth of impermanence. It is fearlessness that we have to cultivate. The famous Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, in order to experience fearlessness, it is necessary to experience fear. The essence of cowardice is not acknowledging the reality of fear. Or cowardice is living our life as if death were unknown, out there, not for me, not about me. Or as if sickness and old age are other people's problems, not mine. Not relevant now, I'll deal with that when the time comes. Oops, too late. Thus the Buddha taught contemplations on impermanence, or more to the heart of the matter, he taught meditations on death. Particularly the various stages of the decaying corpse. He had his monks go out to the charnel grounds or the graveyards and contemplate the various stages of the decaying body. The blistering, festering body, the body that the crows and becomes carrion for the whole of birds of prey, and the body devoured by worms, the skeleton, the bones that become ash. All of this was taught as a remedy for our deeply rooted love for or attachment to this body and this life. This is why the personal study of impermanence is so important. The sixth patriarch of Zen, Huineng, said, impermanence is the Buddha nature. that. So it's studying our fear that is the personal study of impermanence, the basis for our fear. It's studying our relationship with impermanence, how we use delusions to uphold the primary delusion of a sense of self, of something fixed. So we use the delusions, this is, that is, this is what I want, what I don't want. All of these delusions are there to create, uphold the fixed sense of a self, or some place to rest or abide. In practice, we use delusions to root out delusions. We study fear or delusion to go beyond fear, to realize fearlessness. We're not going to arrive at fearlessness by any other way, by examining fear. Whether we're aware of it or not, fear is lurking there all the time, in our lives, moment to moment. Whether it be the fear of death, which most of us kind of block off, keep at bay, until some inopportune time arises where either it comes up for some reason, or somebody close to us dies, or we're reminded of it in some way. Or there's the more subtle fear, the fear that we'll not be able to meet the demands of our life. We feel our lives are overwhelming, and to consider the rest of the world is even more overwhelming. This more subtle fear that's there all the time, rather insidious, slowly creeping up on us, but it's the most culpable in the choices and actions we make, moment to moment. This more subtle fear arises from a fundamental sense of inadequacy, of self-doubt. I'm not enough. I'm not capable. From the moment we exit the womb, there's fear. Babies don't come to the world laughing. And even part of normal development, normal childhood development, is characterized by fear. We go from nursing to weaning, having and then have not. When am I going to have it? Crying when I don't get it. The development of what we call in child development object constancy. The sense that I am separate from mom. That moment when I'm weaning, I'm developing a sense of separateness, as opposed to that continued, almost symbiotic relationship that's there from the womb to the time that we begin to nurse. We have to individuate. Object constancy is the sense that the baby, you and I, are developing a sense of a separate self. And then comes object permanence. Mom goes out of the room. Does she still exist? Baby cries. The sense that mom disappears, but she still exists. Object permanence. Fear. Well, it's kind of interesting. Piaget and Margaret Mahler came up with these terms, but if you think about it, object constancy, object permanence, how can you actually develop those in a world where everything is impermanent, not constant? Think about that. All along, moment to moment, the baby, the infant, the child, is dealing with fear. At some point, I'm sure evolutionarily, it kept us alive. So, childhood upbringing, for most of us, putting aside the normal childhood development, was less than perfect. Usually it was fear-based learning what not to do, what not to say. Some of us, it was even worse. We were mistreated, abused. All of it, instilling fear in our very body and mind. Even the seemingly idyllic childhood is always about some subtle communication of fear from our parents. Their fear becomes our fear, becomes our sense that something's wrong. Child doesn't know what, something's wrong. Becomes for the child a sense of self-doubt, not trusting their life, not trusting the world. And doubt is the first and foremost obstacle to fearlessness. Not doubt about some situation or doubt about doing something in particular, but fundamentally doubting oneself and feeling we have shortcomings as a human being. This doubt, although fundamentally arising from normal childhood attachment and development or conditioning, is continually fostered through our life as we mature as a desynchronization of body and mind. And what do I mean by that desynchronization? Well, every time the mind entertains a thought about something other than what's here now, some other time, some other place, separate from the body, which is always here now, there's a subtle communication to us, a subtle sense of fear. After all, the mind's leaving reality, going somewhere else. On some level, the body's got to be aware, attentive. Back who knows when, in the jungle, it was the tiger that may have gotten us if we were all thinking about something that happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future. So there's a very subtle, almost adaptive fear that's there as a result of that desynchronization of body and mind. It began very early on in our childhood when we heard our parents or our caregivers say, no, don't do that. No, be quiet, sit still. No, not now. No. Some of us tried to be good. Tried to be something other than what we are. Some of us tried being bad, acting out, defying our parents. And some of us stuffed it, held on to it. Either way, as a result, we developed a very subtle sense of something being wrong with us. A fear of being inadequate. We learned, in essence, to separate body and mind through thought-based fear. Like I said, the body never leaves reality, but mind, who knows? Travel the world and back again in a moment. So this desynchronization of body and mind and the self-doubt that ensues from it is further complicated as we get older and become more acutely aware of the impermanent nature of life. Either our pets die, or someone close to us dies, or our things break, or they break down. We begin to age or experience health problems. Our relationships end, or people close to us die. The truth and reality of impermanence comes home to roost. So this shifting ground beneath us all the time has us unprepared to meet the world on its terms, to accept things as it is. So this subtle fear is constantly lurking there in our lives, subtle or not so subtle at times. And it's synonymous with this feeling of insufficiency. This can manifest in a lot of different ways. It can manifest as restlessness, fidgeting, doodling, spacing out. And then there's the more abrupt fear, the panic, when something unexpected happens, circumstances make a turn for the worse, so to speak. We feel we can't or don't want to handle the situation. It causes us to jump, twitch, run away. We have a lot of strategies to avoid fear. In my business, prescribe some Xanax, Chloroquine, sedatives. People go out and get high, go to the bar and get drunk, watch some TV, go to the movies, read a magazine, do yoga, do something spiritual, anything to avoid boredom. Because when we're bored, we're anxious. Anxiety is fear. So when we're bored, we're acutely aware of that fear. We've got to fill that gap quickly. Anything to entertain ourselves is encouraged, and the thought of death or sickness or old age is to be avoided. That's the plan. Well, we have to acknowledge our fear. We have to reconcile it. What we need to do is to study ourselves, to study our movements, study our habits, how we stand, how we put our hands in our pockets, how we look away when somebody's talking to us. We study ourselves, we look and see how fear is operating in our lives, moment to moment. We must study the self and learn something of how fear is operating in our lives and how it's expressed. Master Dogen, a famous Zen teacher, said, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things, or all things." So in studying the Buddha way, the first thing that a Buddhist does is they take refuge. They take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. What does it mean to take refuge? The definition of Webster is to unreservedly throw oneself into. Unreservedly throw oneself into Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Well, if you begin to practice, shortly after practice, you realize these aren't things. Buddha's not a thing. Dharma, the teaching, is not a thing. Sangha is not a thing. These are processes there, pointing to something. So not relying on some fixed thing, but refuge in the very practice or process of letting go, of throwing oneself into, of basically trusting ourselves. Trusting ourselves that we'll be okay. So in Zazen or seated meditation, you talk to follow the breath, the thought comes up, notice it, let it go, you come back to the breath. That whole process of continually letting go is disallowing our wish to hold on, to abide, to fix. We're practicing impermanence. Practice of letting go is practicing how to get comfortable with impermanence. What in practice is referred to as non-abiding or letting go, in truth, in reality, is impermanence. Realizing the truth of impermanence is not noticing it out there in something or others or in my opinions or views. Practicing impermanence is trusting ourselves. Unreservedly throw ourselves into change. To trust the change. Trust impermanence. In studying ourselves, we're examining our anxieties, examining our nervousness, examining our restlessness. In doing that, we are developing fearlessness. No way to fear. No way to fearlessness. Studying fear, looking at our fear, is the way to fearlessness. We don't just muster up our chutzpah one day in the hope that we're going to be brave when the shit hits the fan, excuse my French. It's a practice. It's a cultivation. Again and again, we practice, cultivate fearlessness. And it's not the gradual lessening or wiping away of our fear, but it's going beyond fear altogether. And in truth, in looking beneath the veneer of our fear, we don't find fearlessness. Actually, when we look beneath our fear, what we find is sadness, hurt. It's probably why we don't want to look there. But when we slow down and rest with our fear, we find this very soft, gentle, calm sadness. We feel it in our heart, feel it in our gut. From being acquainted with this heart of sadness and not being afraid of our discomfort, but instead examining it, studying it, this is how we go beyond fear. From this examination or study of this sadness and hurt is born the genuine heart of compassion. We don't learn compassion. Compassion isn't doing good. Compassion is being able to hold, be with our own sadness and fear. And that opens up into this genuine heart of compassion where, being familiar with our own sadness and hurt, we can relate to the sadness and hurt of others. We automatically, the right hand wants to pull the left hand out of the fire. We don't have to think about what the right thing is to do. We feel that. So this is the beginning of the path of the spiritual warrior. Being able to examine our lives, study the self, go to that place, fear, remove that veneer and hold our own sadness and hurt, and let that open up to what is compassionate action in our lives. So have no fear. For in studying ourselves, we'll realize just as the Buddha realized in the morning of his enlightenment, when he said, I, all sentient beings in the great earth, at once enter the way. Already perfect, complete, lacking nothing. Each of us. Probably the only creatures that think we're not. Birds and frogs and everybody else. They just do their thing. They don't think they're lacking. Only we get hung up in all that. The Buddha also said in the Heroic March Sutra, he said, all dharmas, self included, are ultimately liberated. They have no abode. Ultimately liberated. We're already liberated. Already perfect and complete, lacking nothing. That's the good news. Thank you for your time tonight and your attention, and I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. Anybody have a question or a comment?
Don't be afraid.
Thank you for your words, Dr. Carroll. I hope this isn't I should say TMI, but this is very poignant. Because this week I'm going with my wife to plan our arrangements. And I find it so odd because a blink ago I was 20, you know? And impermanence. Wow. I mean, for me to come to terms with impermanence would make me enlightened. And I feel like I'm light years away. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Kevin?
Thank you for your talk. What do you mean by underneath fear is sadness? I'm a little confused by that.
What do I mean?
I would think if I stripped away fear, there would be happiness.
We'd like to think that, yeah. But we can't leap to happiness without first encountering our sadness. You see, if you sit with your fear, you get these instructions when you do seated meditation. Oh, don't move, sit still. Let the urge to move, pass and stay seated, silent, still. It's not just because that's the right thing to do. It's because you're practicing your fear. You don't see it that way because I'm just fidgeting, I'm just restless. It's a very, very subtle thing. Like I said, it's been cultivated since the time before you were born. So to encounter that sadness, we have to sit, we have to settle with that fear. Realizing that if you just look at it from the perspective of, I tell my patients this, especially the patients that I've seen for PTSD, a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder patients, if you've never seen a tiger before, never heard what a tiger is, one day you and your friend, you're young, you're going in the backyard, which happens to be out in the jungle, and you're looking around, you see this big orange, black, white head sticking head out from the bush, and it's like, oh my God, what a beautiful creature. You're amazed by it, and boom, your friend's lunch. You run away. Next time you go out into the backyard, your heart's pounding. You don't know why. Maybe you do. You're looking for that tiger even though it's not there. Your body's already reacting. 10 years later, you can go into your backyard. You're not in the jungle any longer. You're somewhere out. You're just going to go out and mow the lawn, but for some reason, your heart's pounding. Why is that? Maybe the trees remind you on some level of that experience, even though you have no reason to be afraid. What's that fear? Well, when your friend got eaten for lunch, that was pretty sad. On a very subtle level, that happens all the time, and it's accumulated again and again. We're hurt. When you're hurt, you either strike out, you're angry and you're aggressive, or you run away. Either way, it's fear. To sit with that fear is to encounter that sadness. Then, once we've held our sadness, then we're actually able to feel compassion. Happiness doesn't come simply by wiping away our fear. Happiness is what we do. Like I tell patients, you take an antidepressant. Antidepressants don't make you happy. They make you not depressed. Happiness is what you do, day in, day out, how you cultivate your life. There's no way to happiness. There's no way to peace. Happiness or peace is the